Hello, everyone. It
Hey,
is Sunday. It is 10 p.m. Uh,
January the 15th.
yes. And David and I have watched 5 new releases since the beginning of the year. 4
Hmm.
of them were released on streaming, and one was released in the theater. And we really need to share our opinions about these.
It's
So
important.
it is. So, yeah.
Get your coffee and settle
Oh,
in.
yeah. Let's get our coffee.
Hmm. What
So
was
the
the?
first one, I guess we'll go in chronological order. Last weekend we binge watched quite a few. Last weekend we started off with Possession, which was released on Shudder on January 5th. I was super excited to see this one. It was made in 1981, stars Isabella Johnny and Sam Neill, and the director is
Andrzej Zulawski.
okay. Look at that.
Say it like that. It's Polish, so
Andrzej Zulawski.
that works well. That's well
Yeah.
enough for American. Anyway, because I mean, it's difficult if you're not from Poland to pronounce it
Yes.
correctly.
Yeah.
What did you think? You made it when? Yeah. What did you think?
Well,
About
I
it?
guess
I
for
guess we'll
viewers
give your
that aren't
opinions first.
familiar about it, it was released on Blu-ray. It is a little bit hard to find. It hadn't been on streaming. I'd been looking for it for a while because
Mhm.
it's got a reputation for being bonkers.
Yeah.
Really is what. So
And
Sam
that's
Neill,
largely due to a specific performance in the
yeah.
movie.
So in the film, Isabella Johnny and Sam Neill are a married couple, and Isabel, what's her name? Anna.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anna's like, I'm done with this marriage. And Sam Neill's character, whose name escapes me right now, David.
Might be David.
Yeah. Um, he's like, why? Why? And so she it becomes a very volatile breakup after that.
Yeah.
There's a child involved named Bob, and part of it is that Anna keeps coming back, and and Sam Neill's character has like the prerequisite breakdown where he's like goes on a drinking binge for 3 weeks.
Yeah,
and
it's things guys do, and he he flips out a little bit. And
yeah, so
his Austrian friend Heinrich is not much of a. That's her friend though.
yeah, that's her lover.
That's her lover. So he's not really his friend, but he speaks to him a lot throughout the film. So I mean, he's not necessarily a friend, but he's in there.
Yeah, but turns out Heinrich isn't who Anna is having this current affair with. And that's when things really get bonkers. I'm going to say that a lot. It gets very bonkers.
It is a pretty bonkers film.
Isabella Johnny goes all out on this performance. And that's one thing that, I mean, if you see the subway scene, she gives it her all. She really is a woman possessed in that scene, which actually in that scene, I believe she is having a miscarriage in the subway. But
there are tons of religious, symbolisms, and there are a lot of there's a lot of name dropping to specific religious, figures. I guess iconography in there with the crucifix, and she's, staring up at languidly, and there's a subtext to it that is religious very much. Zulawski also made a movie called The Devil, which was kind of like a horror film that's not really a horror film. That came out like about 10 years before, I think. And it's equally strange for a lot of movies that are, would be called, I guess, retrospectively, they'd be called Eastern European, horror films, I guess, in a way. But I think a lot of the critical commentators have mentioned that it's really, I mean, you can read it in purely human terms. I know I read Sam Neill, I think, on Wikipedia there. He said he barely escaped from the film with his sanity intact. So that probably just like Jurassic Park, it was a similar experience. And when he realized what was happening. And so I think it has a really strong human element in there. But I think that metaphorically, I think Zulawski was probably talking about the divide that was, cut into the world thanks to the Berlin Wall, because that definitely divided, Europe. And Poland was on the eastern side of the Iron Curtain, but some critical commentators think it was a metaphor for what was happening. They think he was using it as a metaphor for the Iron Curtain, which was preventing people from, it was an ideological conflict that if you don't understand that central issue that's going on at that time historically in West Berlin, I don't know if you'll really understand some of the nuances that he's putting into it, but it doesn't really function as a straight ahead horror film. I think it actually is much more of a film about emotional trauma,
Yeah.
which is horrifying. I don't know if it really is horror, but I think of the film more as a drama. But there is tons of unsettling imagery and some rather grisly imagery, including a sexual situation that defies. Well,
If
it's
you've seen the
actually
cover of the Blu-ray, it
yeah.
kind of gives you a hint
It's
of
well, it is. It's also post Alien. We have to say
yeah.
that it is post Alien, but I can see the metaphor for the social political turmoil that was happening in Central and Eastern Europe at that time.
Yeah, and I mean, it also deals with issues of doppelgangers and doubles, and which is not doppelgangers,
Well, it does.
but I mean, yeah,
It
I
is a
mean, there's
doppelganger
a
because
lot. I think it's definitely a movie that different viewers can take different things out of for
well,
sure.
it's almost as if they're shedding their old selves because they
Yeah,
become new people at the end. So it's they're replaced with a perfect couple, a la Invasion of the Body Snatcher, sort of. The movie doesn't really have a defined genre, though, and I know Brother Jordan didn't really care for this one at all. I remember he got kind of short with this early on, which is understandable. I mean, this isn't your typical horror film, so I mean, you need to be aware of that if you're going to watch it or invest any time in it. It's not your typical horror film, but I think that's something that the American audiences will have to grapple with. If you do happen to live in Europe, or if you happen to be somebody who is familiar with that history very well, you might catch the nuances that Zworsky is putting into this. But if you don't, it's still and you are just looking for a film to watch this weekend or something or next weekend. It is catch it while you can while it's on Shudder, because I don't know how widely available it is on DVD. I know there's been a Blu-ray
yeah, but it
release,
goes for like over $30.
yeah,
On
it's not
Amazon,
a cheapie by any means,
yeah.
but it is it's a unique vision. I'm sure it's not for everyone's taste. I mean, it would probably offend a few people here and there, but it has a lot of interesting things going on in it, and it is a really crazy performance by Sam Neill and by Isabel.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a dark film, but it's also an interesting film. So if you aren't aware of the social political subtext in there, you might need to watch it with some patience, I guess. But it has some striking imagery.
It does, yeah.
So,
And
would you recommend it?
I would recommend that, if the horror fans, if you feel like, if you read the synopsis and you think it might be your type of movie, check it out. I mean, it's 2 hours of your time.
That you'll never get back.
I did not
There we go.
get the
Life is
socio-political like subtext. That is not my
Your
area of
field.
interest,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it is with David. But as a portrait of two people whose marriage has disintegrated and their sanity along with it, they really, I think the performances sell it. And so I would say, out of 4 stars, how many would you give it?
I would, if I were being movie critic mode, I would give it probably 3.5 out of 5. I think I'm fascinated by any of his work because it is interesting to me, the history of Poland and so forth, and the what's going on with the Eastern Bloc at that time. But I would say probably 3.5 out of 5. I mean, there is a lot of religious symbolism in there. So if you're looking for it's a different tradition that European people come through when it comes to marriage and relationships and sexual mores, so to speak. It's different there than it is here historically. I mean, I'm not saying like, across the board, but it's just a different attitude and it's a different way. I can see people reading it differently. I mean, even if you don't know the social political subtext in the background, you can read the disintegration of a marriage as something different in an Eastern European context, because after they fell to communism, there was a slackening of the restrictions of marriage and what that meant is in terms of commitment and so forth. So it's a different world. It's not necessarily a bad world or a bizarre world, but it's different from what the American puritanical tradition is. So if you watch the film and you're American here like us, you need to know what you're getting into, because this isn't exactly a film that you might understand thematically all the way, through and through. Although there's not a lot of explicit sexual scenes, other than one that stands out in my mind. But Sam Neill's wrestling with the idea of his marriage breaking up is interesting. If you look at it from the American centric point of view, it's interesting. So I would say 3.5 out of 5. I thought it was interesting. It's not for all taste, but it's It's a much more interesting and well made film in some ways, although it does require patience.
Yeah. I'd knock it down half a star and give it 3. He really loves his rotating cameras too. He
Oh yeah,
really
it's
loves,
disorienting at times.
but yeah, it was pretty interesting.
I mean,
So
it's not a total loss as some might think, but it's interesting more if you're interested in that social political history. But if not, it's might be a pass for you.
yeah,
I don't
and
know.
if you just want to see something bonkers,
It's bonkers. It is
it is
bonkers.
bonkers.
It is that.
So, yeah, for a movie that I think is a little bit more bonkers by design.
Yeah.
On HBO Max, The Menu is streaming. It stars Ray Fiennes, Anna Taylor-Joy, and Nicholas
Anna
Holt.
Taylor-Joy.
John Leguizamo's in it.
Yeah.
Judith Light.
The pest comes back.
Yeah, and
The
it's
pest
directed by
returns.
Mark Mylode and written by Seth Rice and Will Tracy. And Mark Mylode mainly has done television. He hasn't done a lot of feature films.
Yeah.
But Seth Rice is a writer for Comedy Bang Bang, the TV show, which I am a huge fan of. And
Great title.
yeah, and Will Tracy, both of them wrote for The Onion and some of the Onion television projects. So that's going to tell you that it's a comedy. I'd say it's got a lot of humor in it. Ray Fiennes is the chef and curator of a island that is self-sufficient, but is one of those. It's culinary, obviously, because the movie's called The Menu. But
yeah. It's a movie for foodies out there.
It really is. It really is.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
Participants in the dinner, it's like, over $1,000 a head, and they are yachted out to the island. And well, little do they know that tonight will be Ray Fiennes' character's swan song. And so the menu starts going awry, and Anna Taylor-Joy plays the companion of Nicholas Holt, and both of them have backstories that unfold. That's one of the things. It's a very character-driven story.
A lot of dialogue, a lot of communication. So there is a story to it.
Yeah. So what do you think about it?
I when I first went into it, I was not certain because I thought, well, this is going to turn out to be another bloodbath, and it's going to go the cheap route with a lot of violence, and it's just going to be like
you thought people were on the menu.
Yeah,
didn't you?
Well, I don't know. I didn't think it was going to be like a cannibal thing, but I thought it was going to turn out to be a little more grisly and unpleasant. And there's some violence in there, but this movie goes to a place that you wouldn't really expect it to. And I think, Ray Fiennes is just such a strong actor. I mean, he's done, Shakespeare notably. I mean, he was Amon Gert in the Schindler's List, the famous Spielberg Holocaust picture. And, he was much reviled as his Nazi commander in that movie. That great, brilliant performance. And this is probably, though, I think in The Menu, this is Ray Fiennes' best performance. I mean,
he really gives it his all.
the way, no, I've never seen anyone make a cheeseburger like he does in this movie. And
we were both almost moved to tears.
I know, and it sounds ridiculous. It does, but it's actually a really moving and really nicely written scene. I mean, you have to see the film, but it's really well done. And I was very impressed by his performance because he has a certain life in this one that I haven't. I mean, he's a great actor in that way anyway. He's trained and he's got stage experience and stuff. He's not just a movie actor, but he brings a lot of, quality of characterization and experience to this part. It's just very nuanced and it's very well written. Yeah, so after it was all done, I very much enjoyed The Menu. I'd say a solid 4.5 probably out of 5 for me.
Yeah.
And, I mean, and Anna Taylor-Joy is great in it. If you've seen her, people who are watching the horror scene might have seen her in Robert Eggers' as the Witch.
Yeah, she was in The Witch and The Northman.
Yeah, the VV Itch, and she was brilliant in that. Well, she was in The Northman too. Although something's wrong with The Northman. We didn't quite get that one here, but it was a. But she's a great actress in her own way, and I love the whole cast. I mean, it was nice seeing Leguizamo show up again, and I mean everybody in it, and it does have some violence. It has a little bit of language here and there, but it's actually I would recommend it probably to most people because I mean it's a great performance from Rafe. I mean it's wonderful to watch. It's fun to watch.
Yeah, I would agree with your rating, 4.5.
Yeah.
Like it was by far out of the 5 movies that we're talking about, it was my favorite, and I've recommended it to both horror. I would recommend it for both horror fans and more
mainstream viewers. I mean, this doesn't go to like extreme horror places. There's nothing like it's very much subtle and it's suspenseful, and they do a really good job of writing these scenes so that it sustains the tension. I mean, they do a lot of good. Like Kate said, there's a lot of dialogue and there's very much a lot of character driven material, and it's just well done. It works for me, and the humor works.
Yeah,
the humor works too. It's great performances. So I would, yeah, the menu might be the best of might be the cream of the crop that we're. It might be the cream of the crop of our menu here tonight of movies. So it was. I recommend it. Who was the writer on it again?
The writers were Scott Rice and Will Tracy.
Well, I don't know exactly if this began as a speculative screenplay or not, but I suspect maybe it did. But kudos to whoever the writers here, because whoever conceived it, because this was a fun movie to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not disappointing. So. No. If you got a good cast of characters and good writing like that, it sustains itself, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I think another movie that we watch that has a lot of cross appeal between both horror fans and non-horror fans, more general audience mystery fans, is The Pale Blue Eye, directed by Scott Cooper, who did Antlers. It's a horror film, which actually I've not seen.
We need to set up a screening of that.
Yeah, and he also wrote the screenplay it's an adaptation of Louis Bayard's novel by the same name. It stars Christian Bale, Harry Melling, Gillian Anderson is in it, Toby Jones, Lucy Boynton. So it's got a really pretty outstanding cast as well. But it's a historical one, and in case you're not freezing enough already, depending on what day of the week it is set in it is set in the cold, frigid winter. There's a lot of snow, and
very blue.
It is set in the 1880s.
Yeah, because Poe. Well, and when Poe was at West Point. And Poe was incidentally the only American writer to attend West Point, as Jeffrey Myers points out in his book. But I think the movie, it's a great premise. It's a great premise because
what's the premise? No, you tell me.
Well, I mean, so the premise is I forget the guy. I forget what his relationship is to Poe, but he's in the army too, or he's not.
He's an investigator.
He's an investigator. He's a detective, right? Yeah. And then he comes to see an Edgar Allan Poe serving it. He's doing his time at West Point. But I think that he's there to figure out who has been killing.
A cadet has been killed, and not only has he been hung, his heart's also been removed.
Oh yeah, his heart was removed from the body. So that's basically what starts it.
Yes.
And then the movie focuses a lot on the relationship between this detective investigator character played by the American Psycho himself, Christian Bale. And American Psycho is the only movie I really think he excelled in his role. No offense to Christian Bale, but I mean, that's the only one I personally take seriously. But this role was good. I mean, he's good in it. And the guy that plays Edgar Allan Poe,
Harry Melling,
Melling looks like Poe. I mean,
he does. He's a very interesting looking dude.
It's interesting that they're trying to find people now who can play Poe, and people like Lovecraft and all these guys who are like milk white, never had any sunshine, macabre, literary figures of the past, because it's hard to find actors or faces who look like these guys because they're so. They're
distinctive looking.
Well, and they wear the maps of their lives on their faces. I mean, it's sometimes depressing to look at them, but which is why you read them, not look at them. But they are. That this movie had a great setup. It's cold looking. It's almost rustic looking at times. There's snow and there's the West Point atmosphere and all that stuff and the military apparatus. It's it works, I guess, as a historical film experiment of sorts. It is slowly paced. It's very measured. It's not an action movie in any sense. I like seeing Melling play Edgar Allan Poe. I liked Christian Bale's fine in it. The actresses in it are pretty good. I can't think of their names or one of their names offhand, but there's
the one that plays his love interest. Her name is the actress's name is Lucy Boynton.
Okay, Lucy Boynton. She does a good job as far as what that is.
And she's the inspiration for Lenore.
Lenore. I think it falls apart in its conclusion. I'm not sure that is what really works. I know that it's fun to play with like Edgar Allan Poe's biography and put all these mystery or supernatural elements in there, but I think it kind of falls down during the conclusion. It's a handsome
climax or the second or the conclusion.
Well, the climax where the ceremony.
That's where it.
I think that it just kind of falls apart there because the performances are good, as we mentioned. I think the atmosphere is well done. I think the writing is not, bad, but it's not especially good. I mean, for what because there's not really, it's not a great story. You got, you have some great figures and great actors here. I mean, good actors for sure, but I don't know. It doesn't work for me as a story. I think it looks interesting. It has kind of a wintry, melancholic feel. It looks very fitting. But I don't buy the storyline, and I kind of wish they would have treated it a little more seriously. I mean, it doesn't go like absurdly off the rails, but it goes off the rails enough that
Yeah.
you just can't. There's a certain point you can't pass beyond.
Well, the conclusion of that you're talking about, like that was where it lost me. I thought it was a
It's
little bit ludicrous.
it
It was
was
a
it's
ludicrous display.
it's absurd.
Um,
It's a ludicrous. It
and
was absurd, and it
but
shouldn't.
then it goes back into like
Yeah,
better territory,
yeah.
like with the
Well,
ending.
you get some more
Like,
emotional resonance in
yeah,
that
but I'm
because
just
yeah.
but I was just kind of like, "Oh, what? Like while
I
I'm
know.
watching it, I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, it's you really have to go with it as a leap there, and I don't think a lot of people, myself included, and obviously not Kate. I don't think it's you have to go with it or not, but it's an interesting looking film, so I don't want to just slap it down entirely, but I wish that it had been written with a little bit more sense. I don't know if that's the fault of the novel because I've not read the Pale Blue Eye novel,
Yeah,
but I suspect the novel is essentially what we're getting in the screenplay adaptation. I can't swear to that on a stack, but I would assume that that's what's going on. So I wish it had been a little bit of a stronger storyline, a little bit more of a realistic storyline because the biography of Poe is so interesting, and screenwriters and novelists they could play with a lot of this material. I mean, you don't have to just report it, but it's like, but when you push it too far, it also distorts. It's unfortunate that it distorts the philosophy of Edgar Allan Poe because it pushes it into this supernatural realm where you don't really get the realistic flavor of macabre that he was writing about. That's why we remember him as an American literary figure. Um,
inventor of the detective
and
story.
the father of the American detective story. So I mean, he was a very influential person on the French, just in the way that Lovecraft would be later, and people like that. So, but Poe is for me a more serious and more interesting writer to consider. But this movie, I feel like they're wanting to pay homage to Edgar Allan Poe, but they don't really know what to do with them. I mean,
Yeah,
some parts of the movie are moving, as you mentioned, like the actual as it gets nearer to the actual end of before the credits, it's actually kind of moving. But the apparatus of the storyline is kind of absurd, and it falls apart. I think so.
speaking of absurd, well, I give this one about two stars.
Yeah, I mean I mean 2.5 at best, and that's being pretty generous because I mean it looks interesting. It has it's got some sense. It's slowly paced. It's not like they turn it into a silly action movie or something that's too crazy and chaotic. It's not that. But I think 2.5 stars is probably generous because it just doesn't really work as a narrative. But it's too bad because I'd like to see
Harry
Melling,
Melling, yeah.
Melling, excuse me. I'd like to see Melling come back and play Edgar Allan Poe in a different kind of story. I mean, he's good. He resembles Edgar Allan Poe, I'm sure, probably when he was younger. So
Yeah.
interesting attempt, but not something I would recommend. Not
Yeah.
really, not in all seriousness. But it was a good effort, good attempt, but not a great effort, rather.
And that one is streaming on Netflix. I think I forgot to mention HBO Max has the menu.
But there are a
Um,
lot of options on Shudder right now.
oh yeah, yeah.
If you're if you don't have the patience for Edgar Allan poetry. So
But
anyway,
yeah, so speaking of
mhm.
absurd, we watched the newest penned by Kevin Williamson slasher, Sick, that
Mm.
debuted on Peacock, I think this past Friday. It's just been in the last couple days.
Was it just recently
Yeah,
made?
that one was
Oh,
just recently
okay.
made. So Kevin Williamson, as people of our generation are sure to know that name, is the writer and creator of Scream. I Know What You Did Last Summer, The Faculty, Scream 2. He did The Following, which was I think it got canceled after a couple seasons. It had
That was a TV.
James Purefoy and
Yeah.
Kevin Bacon, and I actually really liked that TV show. But but so Sick was written by him and another writer whose name I forgot to write down. It was
Okay.
directed by Josh Hyams, who has not directed anything really of note other than I think he's directed some TV series shows. But this really goes, I think one of the biggest hurdles that David and I had with this was that, it treats 2020 as almost a historical event. Like there was a lot of, oh yeah, remember when we couldn't get toilet paper? Remember when we had to wipe down our groceries? Also, I will say that David called it. David and I were discussing potential motives for the slashers, and David said his theory, and I went, I don't think so. Like, it's not going to be that absurd. Like,
Yeah.
it's going to be. And David was like, I think you need to wait and see. And then
Well,
he was like, I called it. And he has not let me forget that
well,
since
it's
last
just
night.
it
But
seemed like the typical Hollywood rubbish, and I'm
yeah.
like, I think this is easy to predict, and it is a very predictable film. But
Yeah.
yes, I did call it that. The thematic thrust of the film was the idea they're punishing people for not following these Nazi guidelines, 6 feet apart and cover your spittle and all that. I knew they were going to do that because this kind of regimented Reichian enforcement is not something we're used to here, and hopefully not in other countries as much now. Although I know that's still going on someplace, but we aren't used to. Even if it's for the public health, and I certainly agree with taking steps to use caution, but this kind of insistence that we saw at the time when people were getting, like I said at the time, I remember I might have written it on social media or something. I said the one vaccine they're not offering is the one that protects people against public paranoia. And I'm sincere in my belief in that. I think the mass media is just an anxiety generator. And I thought it's good to use caution. Don't stick your finger in a light socket if it's plugged in, but use common sense. You don't have to put a mask over your lampshade. So I think it was this movie seemed to me to be terribly exploitative because I thought they're just and it is very disturbing to think of that as a historical period. It was
I know.
it was just a
It's like
little
3 years ago almost.
over
Yeah.
2 years ago, and I'm still angry that they canceled our flights to London at that year, and I'm still. It's a burr under my saddle, and I don't want to be reminded of it. But I remember I could call this one a mile away because I said they're going to make this about these marauding murderous parents who want to come after these girls because they think one of them gave their kid COVID and he died in a hospital bed.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Well, we're strongly encouraging that you just skip this, so you can come at me for a spoiler, but I'm telling you need to just listen to us and then skip it because it's not listen to listen.
And I would,
It's not
yeah. Okay, and
it's
so
not,
I will.
I don't recommend it.
I will say
Listeners.
that David and I did not know each other back in 2020 during the heyday of COVID, and we did take very different approaches to the pandemic at that time. While I did not wipe down my groceries, I did not. I totally respect people who did take precautions. It does play on the like wear a mask with each other. I I can respect the unknown and how it was. Oh my goodness, we heard the words unprecedented so many times.
Oh, it was
But in the
unprecedented.
early days, nobody knew exactly
Yeah,
what shape it was going to take.
yeah.
Nobody knew exactly what was going on. And so I think that, some people's responses to it were to be more cautious and anxious. And I think that no matter how looking back after 3 years almost, I don't think that, there's a right or wrong way that people dealt with it at that time. Actually, no, I don't agree with that statement. I don't think there was.
Just tell the
But
truth. Tell us what you're
yeah,
thinking. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
But
use,
yeah, I
use
mean, I think
caution.
use
take
caution. We
take
both say that
precaution.
you should
Take
use
precaution.
caution.
But if
So,
you
but this is not about really. Well, I
no
mean, but now
well
actually, COVID is being used as fodder for a slasher film.
it's
So
and I can certainly this is not
he's
he's
touching the
touching the screen.
screen with his nose.
Lister wants to turn us off. No, but it's
Lister's like, enough about this.
well, it's just I could call it though. I said I know they're going to try to punish people who are just and you saw a lot of that at the time on social media. People were just saying, oh, these people shouldn't be gathering at the beach or they shouldn't be going to parties and they shouldn't, they've got to stop the orgies for a while. And it's like, well, okay, but the more you ask people to do inhuman things, the harder it's going to be to get them to follow these rules. I can understand if you need a lag period to figure out what's going on, but to me, my skepticism was heightened because the mass media jumped on it just like that. I mean, it was like an overnight thing. And I thought, how did it get from Wuhan, China to Wood River, Illinois, like overnight? And that was what I thought. So that's what I was thinking when I first heard this, and that's what I think. I think it's kind of that's just my opinion, but I think that it was distasteful. Yeah, if it even started there. Anyway, but I think that it was. I think this movie is increasingly distasteful because I think that they're exploiting the fear of oh my God, who's got the invasion virus and who did they give it to? It's kind of cheap. I just think it's kind of cheap, and I personally find it a little offensive. Although the movie, I will say the movie had enough suspense to kind of keep me going, but that's because that's because the one thing you had to prove I was right about my theory, and then the second, and the second thing was is that we had to there's just there's a crazy amount of violence and just crazy crap in there. But the lead actress
Gideon Adlon.
That's her name? Okay.
They've got some crazy names, this cast.
Yeah, well, the two young ladies.
And the other one's name is Bethlehem Million.
Is that a real name?
That's what IMDb says. Well, and Dylan Sprayberry.
Well, anyway, I don't recommend the film. I know I don't know. I just didn't recommend. I think it's kind of cheap and. Regardless of what you think about COVID or what you did back then, this is like Kate asked me. She said, "Do you think it's a little too soon?" And I'm like, I think 20 years from now might be a little too soon because I think we're kind of, there's a difference between, as we said, taking precaution and listening to common sense, and from getting on this mass media hyperbole, which is just making people. And I think that was what the cheap part of the film was, is it's exploiting that kind of. What kind of reaction would people who are unstable have if you gave me cornbread? Yeah. So I thought it was kind of cheap. I didn't like. I'd say 1.5 out of 5.
That's even generous. I'd say 1 star, mainly because that I'm half a star because I'm salty because David got it very right.
Well, I mean the performers are good. I mean it has a couple of interesting. It's interesting just how brazen they were to make something that's this, borderline offensive. It's kind of interesting. But to me, I'd say, well, maybe 1.5 is generous, but you give it a half a star. But,
no, I gave it 1 star.
Oh, 1 star? Yeah, I mean, it's not a 2-star film by any means. So
speaking of media hyperbole.
Mm-hmm. Hyperbole. What do we got?
The last film that we saw that we actually just saw tonight. We came back from the theater and pretty much started recording this is Kyle Edward Ball's debut feature, Skinamarink, which I have been like, there's been a lot of hype around it, and we did have to drive about a half an hour to go see it. It was in a pretty small theater, but the theater was pretty much full. I mean, there was
give or take a couple.
There was a good crowd.
It was okay, it was. I wouldn't say packed, but it was.
No, I mean, also it was like 5 rows. It was a really small theater, but yeah. So Skinamarink, it is a movie that we saw.
Can you be a little more specific?
Yeah, so the premise that everything, because also Roger Ebert has been giving it like 3 stars. I've been seeing a lot of things about it, a lot of buzz, like, oh, it's gonna creep you out. No, this is evolutionary. And
did anybody really use that word? Just rhythm. You're sticking a pin under my rib cage. I don't. It's yeah. But, go ahead. Carry on.
So the premise is 2 children wake up in their house, and both of their parents are gone, and the doors and windows have disappeared. So these children are essentially trapped in the house, and then there is a unknown entity who is upstairs that is giving them directions. And so the children go upstairs, and that is the plot. I mean, I hate to be one of I've seen on the internet 2 people are like, oh, nothing happens and I get so mad and everything. Like, there is building tension, as we've seen with Ty West's House of the Devil. That movie's a slow build. There's slow build, and then there is no build.
This is a
no build.
This is a sub build.
You know that one of my worst criticisms of any movie, I did it in The Northman. I did it twice during this film, is whenever I check my phone to see how much time I think I have left in a film. I was really hoping that the atmosphere, I love movies that build atmosphere that's creepy. I know David and I, like David does not agree with me, but one of the scariest movies I saw when I was younger is the 1950s The Haunting, because of the atmosphere that it evokes. Um, but this, like, I was actually just like okay, like it built the atmosphere for so long that it actually collapsed upon itself for me.
It it really, well, because there's no traditional narrative, there's no plot, and there's really no story. It's a movie that essentially exists on the premise that nightmares are recordable, and people have tried to do this for years, and it's not ever successful because no matter what your dreams are, you can't capture that in a film, and you really can't even capture it on the page. You can't capture it in painting. It's not really something that, because nightmares come from somewhere else. It's very difficult to pin that down. And I mean, it's good that artists and creators and people like this can take inspiration from dreams and from dream imagery, but I think, and the reason I'm pushing it into this area is because the director Ball, what's his name?
Uh, Kyle Edward Ball.
Kyle Edward Ball is. I think he had a series. I forget now what it's called, but you can look at it. You know it. You can research it on Google here. But he had a series on YouTube where he was just recording people's nightmares and then filming depictions of those nightmares. And apparently there was a running nightmare where these people all dreamed that they were kids and they were left alone in the house with some monster or some entity or something, and the parents were gone. And I guess like fundamentally that might be kind of a relatable thing. But there's no narrative. I mean, there's no engine that pulls the train, as Roger Ebert once said, and you got to have an engine in there to really make it worthwhile for the audience. And so I think this movie is kind of symptomatic of what I call the anti-audience phenomenon. And we've been seeing a lot of this junk lately, and I'm not going to mention all the movies I'm thinking, but there are a lot of them that I'm just like, this movie can exist without an audience, and it seems to want to exist without an audience because it makes no concessions whatsoever for any particular audience that would be sane or mainstream or interested in anything. So it's kind of it pushes the boundaries here. Now, I did see on the Wikipedia page, unfortunately, that one of the directors, he had a few other obscure names in there to me, but he was influenced, he said, by Stanley Kubrick. And I think that Kubrick's influence on the horror film, that's something that people need to shake off, because Stanley Kubrick wasn't interested in the horror film, any horror film. The Shining is not a horror film. And I'm just like, I don't know why people keep thinking that's an influential horror film, because Kubrick was not that. And I don't know. I think this kind of influence, like cinematically, the stuff that they're trying to put in there, that needs to start. We got to start pushing back against that, because this is an influence that needs to die, quite frankly. I didn't get much out of the film. I will say though that I don't think there's anything clever here that we can read into it or take from it. I think it's a movie that's supposed to be, it's not exactly stream of conscience, although I use that phrase trying to articulate what I meant, but it's just like disconnected nightmares connected.
No, I mean, it's not even like nightmares. It's like one prolonged
it's a fever dream
nightmare. Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't have the stuff of content. I mean, the reason, I mean, I was kind of joking with Kate, but I said this movie strikes me as being on the spectrum, because the camera is studying the wall. I mean, people are talking and things are going on, and there's some kind of ambiance this director is trying to create, but I'm looking at a wall, and it's like, and that's, or I'm studying the floor, or I'm looking at, a hallway or something. And that's meant to be atmospheric and unsettling. But to those people who have seen a lot of films, and, it's annoying and it's inconclusive and it doesn't go anywhere.
It's one of the coldest films I think I've ever seen in terms of interact. I mean, you do not see characters' faces. You do not, there's really nothing to connect with
Yeah,
in this film. There's nothing to connect with.
there's no human
And
element,
no,
and I think
no.
that's the key thing we have to get at here is that this isn't a film that is after a human element. So that's why I refer to it as the anti-audience phenomena. We were there with some youths at the theater.
Oh yeah, those poor kids.
and
They were basically begging us to
yeah,
explain it to them at the end. They were like
yeah,
6
they're
of
just
them
like,
in
can you
their
tell me
late
what
teens, early
they're like,
20s.
can you explain to me what's going on here?
Yeah.
I said, well, I'm sorry, I can't. I mean, even though my degree has left me helpless in this regard. I can't. Because I don't think he's asking for a certain kind of logic. I think it's just
No.
you're meant to kind of experience it. And although there are lines of dialogue in the movie, sometimes rendered in subtitles as like an experimental gimmick, it's not a movie about words. I mean, there's no ideas, there's no human element. So for me, that's kind of like, well, this is kind of a turn off anyway because there's no story, and it's just kind of I don't know. The
Maybe we're
images
just not connected enough to our inner child, or
Yeah, but I mean, but you
having,
don't.
like, we don't.
I think the whole purpose of not having people in it that you can relate to or faces or anything, you only get some feed and a couple fleeting glimpses at faces or the outlines of faces. I guess that's because you're supposed to kind of fill in yourself in that part. But to me, that just doesn't work. I don't. I mean, it's not that I don't begrudge him for trying this, but I also don't. But I don't think that. I think it's very much an anti-audience phenomenon that we're witnessing here, and I think this is part of that. The critic John Simon said a long time ago. He goes, "When these guys don't want to do what's come before," and he said, "When you want to do something new and it hasn't been come before, that hasn't been done to death before," he said, "there's only one place left to go, and that's the Looney bin." So I mean, so you have to. You have to make it crazy or make it just totally chaotic and out of control to even get anything that's quasi original or fresh. And that is very sad because I don't strictly adhere to that philosophy myself. I think there's new stories around every corner that people aren't telling, and this one is just I just didn't see that. I don't think there's anything we're meant to get out of this. I think it was purely a narcissistic exercise in his ability to see what the camera can do. If you're able to put yourself in the shoes or in the feet of these children, rather, maybe you'll find it more unsettling. There are some haunting, attempts at imagery, but I don't think the imagery itself is particularly memorable. I think it's more draining than it is
No.
memorable.
And the few jump scares did get me because nothing, like, literally, like, they come out of nowhere because you're so used to just like staring at the screen and being like, oh, there's a doorway. Cool.
No, I mean
There's some Legos on the floor.
this is the one film I've seen where you really are he's studying the wall. I mean, it's like there I mean, you have to understand there's no narrative and there's no movement. So even when the camera does move, the whole picture is drained of movement. There's no flow, there's no life to it, there's no sequencing. So it's very odd. It was an odd experience.
I felt so bad for those kids.
Yeah, I know. It's just
it's not cheap to go to the theater, and they were like,
oh yeah,
they were like,
yeah.
they were like,
Those
one was
kids,
like,
yeah.
I've seen some Canadian films before, and this one was just bad. Just like, oh.
Well, I mean, yeah, Canada used to do these great little B movie horror films. Like I was telling Kate about, The Pit was a Canadian movie that used to be on Shudder. I don't know, but Kate found that one too creepy.
I had to turn that one off.
She found that too creepy to sit through. But they did all these
creepy in a completely different way.
They did all these great tax shelter films. Back in the 80s, they did horror. I think it was Basket Case Canadian. I think that might have been. They did a lot of. There were a lot of tax shelter films in the 80s and I think early 90s that Canada did that were horror genre entries, but I don't know where this movie came. I was intrigued to see it because the trailer looked unique, and we're even going to try that Outwaters and see how bad that is. That's got some
like I just want to get my hopes up and my hopes be met like once.
Well, it all depends what you're looking for. I mean, if usually if you're looking for like something really gruesome and grueling, you kind of know where to go, and if you're looking for something subtle and a little more story and character, you kind of know where to go. This movie is just like an experiment in it's very, I mean, the phrasing is very autistic, and I don't mean to use that word as a pejorative. I think it's very much, the camera is a very lingering, non-emotive, kind of a little bit of the camera seems
It's
to me
cold.
it's cold. It's inarticulate, and
which is not just yeah,
yeah.
which is I don't.
Yeah, well, I know what you mean. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the word cold didn't strike me because I think there's a lot going on, but it's just rendered insignificant because you don't have any character and you don't have a story. So
Yeah.
you are left to use your imagination, as the critics say here, and you're meant to fill it in on your own. But there's literally, to me, there was not enough apparatus to put myself in the feet of those kids or anybody or anything that's in this movie. I think there's some kind of, I mean, apparently there's some kind of monster or some kind of demonic presence of some
We
sort.
don't know.
I mean, it's not, it's what you bring to it. And I mean, I don't know if this director is trying to expose the fact that people aren't used to, filling things in with their imaginations anymore, or if he's, which is kind of stupid to, do that. Or if he's trying to make a real serious attempt at like making a prolonged dream nightmare escape, and just trying to let it linger. But whatever he's doing, for me, it doesn't work aesthetically. I thought it was going to be more interesting having watched the trailer. I've been very let down.
Me too.
Now that I've actually witnessed it.
So I'd give it. I'd give it a 1.5 stars. I'm sorry.
No.
I respect people trying to do stuff different. I think the big thing for me was, as far as the movies that we watched, the 5 movies, the one that I went in with the lowest expectations and was surprised the most by was The Menu. Mm-hmm. Possession, I knew was going to be bonkers. It lived up to that. The Pale Blue Eye, I kind of knew going in that was going to be, a Midland historical thriller, and it was. Sick was probably the worst one that I saw, based on just...
It's a sick film.
Yeah,
for the reasons I described. It's a sick
so
film.
I think Skinamarink is actually slightly above Sick, just because it did not rely on some tired tropes. It did not feel exploitative, except it did feel exploitative to my time and money.
Well, and Sick is very... You got... well put. And see, Sick is very cliched in its attack scenes and some of the slasher. I mean, it's a slasher. It's really a slasher wannabe. Yeah. I don't even know if it's a slasher wannabe. But anyway, it's very cliched at times. But you do have amusing performances, and you have this controversial aspect you can talk about with the COVID stuff, like we did. So you have there's some amusement there, even though it is a bad movie in my opinion. I don't think I can give any stars to Skinamarink because I don't like the genesis of where this came from. I mean, I think that there's, as the word I use around Kate all the time is technocentrism, and I think that that's the fact that this stuff came from material that you get on YouTube channels or you get on these kind of platforms like we're talking on here. I mean, this is not where the next generation of horror or genre greats are going to be getting their information. I don't know where. I don't know. That's my opinion. It's just my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm telling you that, are we going to have any more Edgar Allan Poes or even sub Edgar Allan Poe writers like Lovecraft in this day and age? I'm very skeptical. And my reason is because I know you don't agree. I'm just letting me say my piece. But the reason is because, like this particular filmmaker right here, where's he getting these ideas? I mean, what he's doing, he's doing this, and it's like, and this is not the imagination. So I think I don't want to knock him for trying something unique. I know a lot of people, this is a controversial movie. Like there's people that love it or hate it, but I think I'm forced to withdraw into a position where I cannot give it any stars. I don't think this deserves a star system, but I can't give it any because I didn't enjoy it. I didn't understand it. And I didn't really, I was very let down with the whole genesis. The sui generis of this thing just makes me a little uncomfortable. It makes me uneasy to where these people are finding this new inspiration because it's not literate and it's not filled with the stuff of life that Edgar Allan Poe's macabre death poetry is. There's life in those death poems, and there's life inside of his view of nature and reality, and this is not that. So what were you?
Oh no, I was just going to say that that I think that you and I both agree at the core, which is that why are filmmakers replaying tired tropes? Why are they, whenever they're doing something that's being touted as original, falling back on creepy pastas and YouTube clips, whenever there is the horror genre in literature is really doing amazing right now. And there's
I
a
don't mean to
lot of
knock
fresh
all that.
voices.
I don't mean
I
to
know,
knock all
that's why I'm
that,
like,
but I
oh,
don't.
because you get
But,
me started and I'm like,
well, let me
why
wait, no,
aren't
wait.
they adapting?
Let me amend my statement by saying I'm talking basically about filmmakers and movie people here, the
Okay.
people of the video game generation. Let me put it like that. I'm not talking about everybody who's writing and trying to do original voices.
Yes. So,
Let me amend that just slightly.
okay.
Go ahead.
So,
What you
no,
just saying.
because there's a lot of original stuff that could be made into movies. One that I just read that I don't think could be made into a movie is Eric LaRocca's "You've Lost a Lot of Blood," which
Do you think that has the stuff of cinema?
I don't think that one does, because
Okay.
that one actually, the way that it's not only written, but the story itself is um multi-format and
The way it's constructed.
yes, the way it's constructed is like a novella within a novella and has some transcripts and
It probably
some
shouldn't be,
poetry.
then. Shouldn't be,
So yeah, I don't think it would translate to film. And then right now I'm reading Daniel Krause's The Ghost That Ate Us, which, like Richard Chismar's Chasing the Boogeyman, which came out I think in 2020, maybe 2021, that mixes autobiographical information with fiction. And whereas Richard Chismar kind of did a true crime based on his kind of background, Daniel Krause has taken the well, I don't know, it's kind of like a poltergeist, but then there's a crime that's happened, but there's like photographs, so it blends
it's making
fiction
it's
and
doing something original with the book form.
yeah,
And I think that's just a different medium. As you know, I mean, we talk about media here, we mean movies and TV and what's hot and what's not. And I think that, the book form, that people can still do. I don't, like I said, I need to amend that statement a little bit, but by and large, I think the Kubrickian influence needs to be dropped. I don't understand exactly what's going on with Hollywood, because they have an entire corpus, a backlog that is longer than the Suez Canal, that they could go back and start remaking titles. The Leech Woman from 1960, the Mole People.
Why hasn't anybody remade the creature?
We were joking about that this morning. Said, well, how come Carpenter's 1980 reboot of the Creature from the Black Lagoon never got out of the swamp? I mean, what's going on here? And because the studios own all these properties. I mean, I'm not saying that would be healthy for contemporary writers and creators, that they're going to just go back and do that. But how come the studios aren't going back to look at the properties that they already own, that they bought lock, stock, and barrel and paid for? How come we're not getting those in the theater? The Cape Fear remake from 1991, I don't want to keep harping on that one, but it's like, that was a brilliant way to remake a classic, an oldie. That was a brilliant way to remake it, and script wise. And I thought, why can't they do that with like what we were talking about this morning, like Creature from the Black Lagoon? Instead, we're getting a lot of movies that are just, rehash, or they're pastiche, and they're just films that are part of the anti-audience phenomenon. Like, I was griping pretty seriously about Terrifier 2, because I just don't understand how that got into a theater. And I was like, where is the backlog of the studio films? I don't know where these are at. So either the studios are only going to put money behind Marvelous films and DC comic films. Maybe they're not going to do any good movies going forward. I mean, I don't know, but it's like, I know that they're sitting on a gold mine of properties that even if you went back to 1965, 70, and then come forward, there's films that could be remade. Why are they remaking The Exorcist? I mean, The Exorcist is a classic, whether you love it or hate it. It's finite in its William Friedkin form. It doesn't need to be remade. It doesn't need to be adapted for TV or audiobook or anything. It's done and over. William Peter Blatty is dead. So it's like, stop. I don't know what they're doing. That would be my big question, is why aren't you remaking the titles that we need to have remade, that are more proper and better written and maybe a little more, cogent for our era? Why aren't they saving those old titles? How come they're coming? Why are we getting movies like Skinamarink in the theater? That would be my question. I mean, I hate to sound like I'm dissing on all the people who are, the new people who are writing and trying to make films and all that. But I mean, if what we've been seeing lately is the best that they can do, then maybe they need to consider what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. It's like I'm saying it. So it's like, because I just don't understand where it's at, and I kind of wish that we could get some better product out there. I mean, I don't know. Skinamarink struck me. I didn't even know what that title was. I thought this was going to be like a slasher movie at an ice rink, because I said, "Oh, Skinamarink." I thought, okay, now I thought maybe it was like I thought
about the song.
Yeah. Kate knew the song. I didn't know. I thought this was like a version of the Richard Matheson script Face Off. You know, I thought this is the ice hockey killer. You know, and it was so I hadn't even heard that song or whatever that child's ditty is or whatever. So I thought, well, this is weird to me. But I just didn't. It didn't work. It doesn't. It also didn't have the stuff of cinema, which is that's difficult to explain to people what that is unless you've watched a lot of films and you know what movies should be. You know, and it's like I just don't think it works. So.
Well, I think Lister is telling us it's time to wrap it up.
Lister says no.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us. So did you say everything that? Yeah,
I think so. I think Lister's like, are you done yet? I think so. I mean,
thanks
we're
for
very disappointed. That's all.
So our last final take: see the menu, skip Skinamarink, and Sick.
Yeah, Sick.
And
is a sick film.
check out Possession if you want something bonkers.
If you get a little more of the geopolitical context, you might enjoy it more. But I mean, it's not to everybody's taste. So it's a curio now. But,
yeah. So it's got Sam Neill.
Yeah, so, I mean. For what that's worth.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd rather recommend it for Isabella and Johnny, but
yeah.
You know, it is.
I mean, she is great in that too. So
she's nicer to look upon.
Yeah,
fair to
she
look
is.
upon.
She is very nice to look upon.
Fair to look upon.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back at some point with some more content. So bye.